All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the West Virginia Watershed Network series, Nonpoint Source Program Approaches to Reducing Fecal Coliform Pollution. This is the fifth and last of 5 weekly webinars that we've been hosting to provide tools and information to help watershed groups address fecal coliform loads in streams. So my name is Jenna Dotson. I am with West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and I also help coordinate the West Virginia Watershed Network. That network is a group of nonprofits and also state and federal agencies who support the work of watershed organizations across the state and provide resources and tools to enhance the work of watershed organizations, provide trainings like this one. So thank you all so much for being here today. Before we get started with our training, we're just going to go over a few Zoom housekeeping notes. First, as you can tell, this is a Zoom webinar, so as an attendee, your video is off as well as your audio. And we are recording this webinar too, as you heard, so we're going to be posting it on the Watershed Network webpage, along with the other recordings of the previous 4 webinars. Some of them have already been posted. Martin will put a link in the chat if you wanted to go back and view any of the other webinars that were part of this series. If you go to that link, you'll want to make sure you scroll all the way down to the bottom of that webpage where it says webinar recordings. And then finally, for questions, you can type your questions into the Q&A box that'll be found at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar at any time during the presentations. We're going to have 2 speakers today, and we'll have a short question and answer session after each of the speakers' presentations. And if you would prefer to ask your question verbally, then you can just note that either in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question out loud. So with that being said, I will pass it over to Martin to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you very much. I'm Martin Christ. I'm the Northern Basin Coordinator for the Watershed Improvement Branch in the DEP. I am happy to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Little. She is the Stream Partners Program Coordinator in the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection's Watershed Improvement Branch. And before she was the Stream Partners Program Coordinator, she was the Southern Basin Coordinator. Her presentation is wastewater treatment for the community of Ashland. Go ahead, Jen.
Hi, thank you, Martin, for the introduction. I'm going to do my best for all of you, but this is not a new project. So you're going to hear some history and a little bit of how this project got started, because it is a good example of community involvement. We're going to start with here is a photo of Ashland, which is sitting in the county of McDowell County. In the picture, you'll see the Ashland Company store, one of the businesses there. What I'm putting in is just a reminder, as some of the presentations you have seen previously, that our section of the Watershed Improvement Branch works towards water quality improvement, and to put a lot of the funding that we work with is 319 funding. And you must have these criteria in place in order to get 319 funding on these projects. This location, the Ashland Wastewater Treatment Project, took place in what is the Tug Fork watershed. So we're going to use as an example as the Tug Fork. I'll show a map of that later. But there was an article written in 2011 by Canadian Valley Institute that looked at some of the struggles to work with infrastructure and wastewater in this region. Some of the problems we're dealing with were population decline, which makes it hard for communities to pay back or take on loans when you start losing the populations. Low income, not a lot of resources. It's very remote. The topography and the mountains make it difficult. A lot of times the homes are down in the floodplain along the streams, and they do not have the soils or percolation that's going to allow for a septic system. And there is not a united, or at that time, a well-united voice to speak about this need for infrastructure and wastewater in these communities. So the beautiful picture at the bottom shows straight pipes, which should be a term you probably have heard prior to this, but there are still homes without inadequate wastewater, where the home sewage will go through a PVC pipe, and make its way directly to the stream without any kind of cleaning process before that. The organization called the Wastewater Treatment Coalition in McDowell County unfortunately does not exist anymore. And I came in about halfway through this process in 2007. But it takes a while for things to happen, especially infrastructure. And I think that it resounds a lot with groups in general and watershed associations for sure, that sometimes to get the people moving, that takes some kind of a tragedy or a united effort. So the big floods of 2001 and 2002 were 100-year floods that impacted the community or the county of McDowell County. There was 7,700 homes that resulted in $68 million in damage. And nonprofit, faith-based, and government organizations responded. And together they formed a long-term flood recovery task force. This was in 2001, 2002. And they met with Ray Hall, and Ray Hall advised to them that they form this task force and start creating a comprehensive document of the wastewater needs in that county. So that would have been 2003, 2004. It took a couple years, and they worked together and created a countywide wastewater plan that was completed in 2005. And that was actually in a time when it was paper. There's actually electronic versions, but it's a paper document that I used to carry around all the time. The group that formed that task force, I think it's sometimes the partners and who they are important, but it included the McDowell County Parks and Rec, WVU Extension, the Council for Southern Mountains, McDowell Rural Health Advisory Council, and together they formed McDowell County Wastewater Treatment Coalition. So in 2003, they started forming the Wastewater Treatment Coalition. And it was about 2005 when DEP came to the table. And then for me, it was 2007. So then after they finished the countywide plan, the next steps were to see where we would start putting projects in. And that second slide talking about having a watershed-based plan necessary to have funding from the EPA for 319 funding was another step. I'll talk more in detail. I'm just kind of giving you a timeline here. And then it was 2008, 2009 when Ashland was being implemented, constructed, and completed in 2010. This slide was one I put together for this today. There was a lot of partners involved in this project to start with for the whole thing. These are the members and partners of the Wastewater Treatment Coalition. So there was municipalities, there were residents in the communities, there were nonprofits, there were county and federal agencies involved as well. So there was local and there was some outside support coming in. Very diverse group. So when they started doing their study on the wastewater need in the county, they found there were only 4 towns in the county that had wastewater treatment. So that's 25% of the population. So very few septic systems actually in the system of being permitted or tracked. So less than 1% is served by any kind of a package plant. And this statistic was out there for a lot. This is 2005. 67% of the households in McDowell County did not have adequate wastewater treatment. So a lot of straight pipes discharging into the streams. And these streams in McDowell County definitely had high. There was, the Watershed Assessment Branch did a lot of monitoring prior to all of this, 2001. And the bacteria numbers match exactly what you were seeing here. In the plan, again, it showed how many homes didn't have adequate wastewater. It also gave examples of what type of systems might be in place, because also in McDowell County, you have a lot of sparse, spread out. Again, it was a population that's decreasing. So spread out homes, not a lot of space, a lot of them in the floodplain, and maybe a few places kind of clustered together. The 3 main elements that came with this McDowell County wastewater plan was, again, identifying what's currently sitting there. They mapped it. what is some potential treatment type that could be there, and then the projects were prioritized. So maybe you'll start seeing in the pictures, you'll start spotting some of those straight pipes. The types of systems, what they categorized were either sewer line extensions, if it made sense, to a public system, one of the four we mentioned before, or on-site systems, which would be something like septic tank or something like that in an individual home. On-site cluster systems where you can treat several homes together, maybe sharing some type of a septic tank or stag, and a package plant, which might be a community system, but not a smaller community system. This is what this report looked like that they put together, listing all the communities that did or did not have sewer, gave a description of what kind of a system would be best and where that extension could come from. Here was the mapping. Mapping is a lot better nowadays, but again, we're going back to 2003, 2004 here. This shows where the potential treatments could go, best suited for those regions. So after the wastewater treatment, countywide wastewater plan was created, and the wastewater treatment coalition is functioning as a strong group and board members. The first project that they selected they did do a demonstration project at the Big Sandy Head Start building. I was not there for that. I really can't speak on that very well, but I know that they said they learned some lessons from it. So this is sort of the second project, but it was after the plan was completed. So the next step here was they wanted to work in Ashland. There was the Ashland Company store owner was in need for a system, and the North Fork of Elkhorn is the creek that runs through there, and it is a reproducing trout stream. Whether it's supposed to be native or not, I'm not sure. Depends on who you ask. But nonetheless, people come from all over to fish there. And the Hatfield-McCoy trailhead also starts there. So the economic growth was kind of coming. So the decision was that there would be a buy-in and support, and there's definitely bacteria issues that we saw that was only really sampling at the mouth. And we needed to write a watershed-based plan. So the next steps were to get out and do some monitoring and see how bad it was. Just for reference, again, the North Fork at Elkhorn is a small watershed within the Tug Fork watershed, much bigger, as you can see, expanding across multiple counties. So it was in the Tug Fork watershed. This here is the map that was created for the watershed-based plan. This beige blob is the watershed of the North Fork at Elkhorn. So the Ashland, if you look on there, upstream is a small little community called Cherokee to the right side of the map. That is the area where Ashland was getting wastewater, kind of going between Ashland and up to almost, not to Cherokee, but to the red dot there. And we've sampled in those areas. Here was what was prescribed from the wastewater treatment plan for what types of systems might work best in that area. You'll see in Ashland, there was a cluster system. So the homes are close enough. The soils weren't great. So something should be put in there to handle multiple homes. That was the suggestion. Here is the estimated, so to get the prioritization and information in their wastewater treatment, countywide wastewater plan, they would look at the number of homes and then estimate the average amount of waste coming out of each of the homes. And then again, for the watershed-based plan, saying how much is a reduction if we tackle these communities. These communities listed here, Algoma, Greenbrier Hollow, these are all within the North Fork of Elkhorn. So Ashland is one of the communities. There was 18 homes there. McDowell was another little small spot downstream. Everything else was downstream of Ashland. So it made sense to start there. If you want to see results, you want to start in the headwaters. They were estimated costs of what it would cost at that time to do these projects. I bet Kathy could give us a much better update of what it would cost now. Again, we're talking along 2003, 2005, 2008 window. This is the watershed map, and the entire length of Elkhorn Creek is 8 miles, and then Windmill Gap is the smallest little tributary coming into where just upstream of Ashland, coming into Ashland. So these are the 3 sub watersheds broken down at an even smaller scale. I would suggest, again, if you're going to try to look for water quality improvements, with community sewer and wastewater projects, you want ideally to work headwaters, you want to work close together, and you want to get, some initial buy-in or discussions with your communities. The 303D listing was already there for Elkhorn Creek, North Fork of Elkhorn, and then Windmill Gap as well. So they were listed, but they wanted more recent data because that was already old. So I did come along at this window and do the water sampling in these creeks, and we could see where the hot spots were. You'll see Windmill Gap is the tributary that we were working on. Where Windmill Gap comes in is where Ashland is, and Crumpler was coming off of the top of the hill just downstream. So going from what looks like Cherokee down to where it says Windmill Gap, and you'll see numbers in the 1700 or 9,000, which we do not want bacteria numbers that high. Our water quality standards like to have things below 400 colonies per unit. So these are high numbers and a good space to be working in. Here's the water sampling that we did. Some pictures of the Petri dishes to show the difference of something that does have bacteria. And although the samples we did send to the labs and get flow measurements so we could take flow and lab certified data and calculate the load reductions we would get from this. What I do remember, and this being an interesting location, is I did do the pre and post monitoring on this project. And I wish I had a photo, but I have a mental picture of grabbing the benthic macroinvertebrates, the bugs in the stream sample. And what we would get there was an abundance of very pollution tolerant species. I remember I've never been in a stream covered with aquatic worms, and it was squirming in my hands. So lots to feed on. And again, lots of trout to you as an avid fisher group in that area, but not a lot of diversity. Here's a little bit of a rundown of just some of the project steps that we used. I thought it was important to know if you were going to tackle something like this. And I think I saw just a minute of Kathy's slides, so I think you're going to hear this a lot. It is really important. You can't go in and do a community system of any kind if you don't have any entity, somebody that is responsible and able to manage the system. And this was a unique situation where the public service district at that time was not dealing with wastewater. So we were creating an entity at this time. Groups were coming together trying to see who could manage this community system if it's installed. Then finding, after you've identified that, you want to secure funding for the project and get some in design work, because you need to know how much it's really going to cost, because a lot of this is kind of arbitrary data. And then who's going to be able to handle the funds. So we went through getting the watershed-based plan, which means we can get some of the federal 319 funding, but now we need match. And it's a lot more than what we normally have with 319. So at the time, my boss was Teresa Kuhn, and she went on a hunt trying to find funding. You have to get easements because the system had combined septic tanks for several homes, part of the system, as well as the line and the pumps being installed. So there was user agreement discussions. We had a public meeting with the residents in Ashland and talked to them about and made brochures to educate them about the importance of a community system and what not to put down them, and to talk to the residents downstream as we tried to put where it would make sense to do septic tank repair work. You have to make sure that you've got the cost of O&M over time, which is a hard one, and there is a manual on how to maintain the Ashland system. It did need to have a UIC permit, so there was discussions on what would be required for the injection well permit for the system. I haven't talked about what the system looks like yet, but this is kind of the steps. Again, the watershed-based plan was approved. The informative meeting with the community. Something that I remember from that meeting is that, again, this was a diverse area. We actually worked with not just low income, but we had women, a lot of women come to the meetings. And I was told at that time that it was going to be mostly the older generation and the women that were going to be most the decision makers. I'm almost like a matriarch in this community particularly. So it's good to know your community and who's making those decisions. And I think they knew that their streams were not clean, as we talked a little bit about that, and they wished that their kids or their grandkids could play in the creek. So as long as we tried to keep it at a reasonable price, and find all the grant funds we could. We had their buy-in, we kept them in the loop. So, searching for more funding. And then I'll talk about the project as we move along. This is a aerial layout of what the system that was decided to use here. It was a unusual, not a normal system in place. And I'm sure Kathy or someone else can explain more about this. I am not an engineer, but there was, again, combined, you'll see what says STEG system, where there were several houses that shared like a septic tank. And then they went through lines that would be fed to a pump station. And this pump station, because there was no land downstream that we could utilize and that was flat, and probably would perk, the waste was pumped up very high. I don't remember the elevation, but high up on a mountain, and through a low pressure, went to a low pressure pipe drain field. And there was the wetland first. It went through wetland cells, and then it was through a low pressure pipe drain field that had some wells that you could check. So it's a very unusual system. Meanwhile, there are actually Hatfield-McCoy ATV trails, excuse me, that go in right near where the wetland cells are as well. So it became maybe a landmark that people could see as well. This is a breakdown of what the cost was for the project. I think the shocking part in here is just the amount of different funding sources. Some of this is match, and some of this is also, funding from the Clean Water Act, DEP funding, and private donations, all kinds of. And then we had a religious group that we worked with that helped. Actually, the West Virginia Ministry of Advocacy and Work Camps, they had a working, I think it was a couple of weeks, where kids came in, older kids, not young kids, and they hand dug the drain field. So it was very innovative and a lot of interesting partners coming to the table. Here's some pictures from the construction, putting in the lines. In the first picture, there is the students hand digging the drain field, which saved some money. We were definitely on a tight budget. And then people from the Wastewater Treatment Coalition partnerships, we went out and planted the wetland cells with wetland plants. Here is some of the post-Ashland monitoring data after the system was installed. Now, at that time, the wastewater treatment system was working well, so no longer these super high 9,800 and 9,000 colonies. Now we're looking at, everything meeting water quality standards at that time. So this project went to the EPA as a success story, so we could delist a stream. Again, this was not a fast process, but well worth it, and amazing people. Here's some facts about some of the Ashland system, their overview. Again, it describes what type of system it is, a small diameter sewer going to the wetland, and then it removed, here's some numbers I thought, the 3,500 gallons of raw sewage per day. That's a big number. This was a demonstration project. I do not know of another system installed that was designed this way. There were others installed around this time frame, but not the same one. It's a good example of getting residents and people involved. We got support and oversight with some other consulting firms that helped us. We had to create the Ashland utility to manage and oversee the system, because at that time the Public Service District wasn't willing or able to do so. The next step was the Wastewater Treatment Coalition finished up Ashland, and there was there's Crumpler, a community that's up on top of the hill that then drains downstream of that. And we had some initial discussions, got some money to get a preliminary engineering report done to try to put in a community system there. And to start addressing what was in that watershed-based plan was all these areas that did still have failing septic system straight pipes in the floodplain, but they were able to get and would qualify, PERC tests passed, they could put in a septic system or an alternative system. So we went door to door and worked with them, and we used what Kathy, I believe, is going to talk about next, would be some of the on-site loan program funding as a match to the 319 fund. So it was state money to match the federal. So people only had to do 40% loan on a low interest loan. So it was well received, and the people were wonderful to talk with, and seemed like they wanted the system as turn around and invest in their own home if we could find a way to make it as free or cheap as possible as we could. And then we created brochures and went around and again went door to door and talked with people. And then again, we posted the paperwork to list Ashland as a success story to delist Windmill Gap, and went forward on the Crumpler project and continued to work on getting systems downstream. It sort of faded somewhere in 2011. I believe what happened was because the McDowell County Wastewater Public Service District was finally deciding to take on Colwood and some other wastewater projects in the county. And that coalition may not have been necessary anymore if the Public Service District was going to take on these roles. So it has not come back to fruition, but here's a positive light in a moment of doom and gloom with flooding, that if you can get people rallied together and potentially get some data and then speak to your politicians, you might be able to get some more support for infrastructure. That is my last slide. So Jenna or Martin, if you guys want to allow questions or allow Kathy to go on, I'm good with either one.
Thank you, Jen. The floor is open for questions. We have none in the Q&A box at this point.
Perfect. Means it's really clear.
Absolutely. So we'll give about, I don't know, 15 seconds or so. And if no questions show up, we'll move right along.
Sounds good. I can say that I will share, if wanted, I will share this presentation, but I do have electronic copies of the out of date, but the wastewater plan for McDowell County, I have found electronic going through my files. So if that's something that other groups would like, or the article that talked about the need for infrastructure in rural Appalachia, they're pretty well written. I can share them.
And could you speak a little bit more about like the Elkhorn Watershed Association's specific role in this project?
When I came on, several of the volunteers wore multiple hats. So we had Dorothy Horn, who was a resident of Elkhorn and with the Elkhorn Creek Watershed Association. They helped talk with the local politicians, county commissioners, and folks like that. And then we use stream partner grants, which you guys, that's, my new role, and I'm sure most watershed groups have worked with there. That is one of our funding sources to try to be able to go and promote these projects. Not the big funding, but the Elkhorn Creek Watershed Association was there at the very beginning, and then they were just a part of the membership. So my previous boss, Teresa Kuhn, she did so much of the legwork before I started in 2007. There was all these every month meetings at the local Presbyterian church, middle of the day, very, people coming from all over, people from Canaan Valley to people coming within the local area, nonprofits you wouldn't think of, like the one I listed on there that was like Faces, and also McDowell County was going through the middle of their blueprint process with Hub. And so there just was a lot of need, and everyone realized they needed infrastructure. So timing was great. The Watershed Group just applied for small funding and were locals for the squeaky wheel.
If I may, one of the things I'd like to add, I think that you've pulled together with this is these small systems in these rural areas without community support. It doesn't matter how much money you give them, the project is not going to come off. It's just not. So I think that's what brought Ashland together, because if you had not drummed up community support, then
it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened. Now, I will tell you, I'm a little bit worried about the project to replace it, because they did get an AML pilot grant awarded several years ago for Ashland Crumpler project.
Mhm.
And I don't know who's pushing that project. SRF is not co-funding it. So the estimates that I saw are several years old. Prices have skyrocketed in the last few years. So I'm not sure who's pushing the replacement project and making sure it stays up to date. I would hate to see them lose a very large AML pilot grant.
I would love to see who I can. I'll try to be a squeaky wheel a little. I'll see what I can do. Thank you, Kathy.
Well, are there any other questions from any of the panelists or any participants? And if you think of a question, you can always put it in the Q&A or you can ask it out loud a little bit later too. But I think right now we'll transition to Kathy. So Kathy, if you want to start sharing your slides. So Kathy Emery is the Chief Engineer for West Virginia DEP's Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And today she's going to be providing an overview of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund for us. So take it away, Kathy. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Clean Water SRF program, but I've been with this program for almost 30 years now. So very familiar with it, real passionate about it. I think it does excellent work. But I thought I'd hit an overview of some highlights, then we can get down into a little bit more of the weeds on this. All of this information I'm going to go over is in what's called our intended use plan. This is on our webpage. It's a document that's updated every year. It covers everything anybody really needs to know, what they're eligible for, how much they could be eligible for, the funding terms, how much money is available, what you need to do to qualify. Everything is in there. But one of the first things everybody wants to know is how much money is available. Now, under normal years, we only have one funding stream. But you're going to see on your screen, we've got a base funding allotment and a bill funding allotment. The base funding is what normally comes through, only it's usually more than 11.7. It's usually around 20 to 25. But there's been some congressional funding changes that have caused that to drop here in recent years. But coming into this current fiscal year, we had an $11.7 million CAP grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. EPA provides it. 20% state match is required. That comes from the state's Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council. So the communities do not have to provide a match. The match is provided to the fund up front. We are required to have we have a 10% green goal. So encourage projects to incorporate energy efficiency, water efficiency, traditional green infrastructure into their projects. And we need to forgive a certain amount of our grant every year. So it's about $4.7 million coming into this year. Now, with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, these are interchangeable terms, that provided a second funding stream to the SRFs for a 5-year period. This amount, the 32.5, is year 2. And you'll notice it's a 10% match. However, that was only for the first 2 years. This coming year's funding we're applying for is a 20% match. Again, we have the 10% green goal that goes with that. And we have to forgive 15.9 million or 49% of our base grant. And that's about $15.9 million. And I know everybody's thinking, great, that's $20 million of free money, but it goes quicker than you think when you're looking at a statewide program. We also get money coming through principal and interest repayments on outstanding loans, investment earnings on our funds, and we're revolving to the tune of about $40 million per year. So if the CAP grants disappeared tomorrow, that's a ballpark of the amount of money that would still continue flowing into the SRF program for projects like this. Funding terms. We have 4 tiers of loan terms for everyone. Those percentages, the 1.5% to 2%, that is a measure of what the sewer bill will be as a percentage of the median household income in that community. So if your sewer bill for 3,400 gallons of water is less than 1.5% of the median household income, we have charts detailing all of this in our IUP. No one's going to have to even do any math. You can just look up the town. There's a chart. We can tell you exactly what that number is. But the highest terms that they would have is a 3% 20-year loan. We have amended this so that if for collection distribution system projects to go out and extend sewer service to unserved areas, if we move to a 30-year term, if it can document a substantial rate decrease to the customers, we'll look at going for 20 to 30 years. If you're from 1.5 to 1.74%, that's a 2% 30-year loan. If you're at 1.75 to 2%, it's a 1% 30-year loan. And if the rates are going to be higher than 2% of the median household income, it's a 0.5% 40-year loan. So as you can tell, we've geared those funding tiers to give the best interest rates to the most economically disadvantaged areas. Those that are going to struggle the most repaying a loan. The annual admin fee you see on there, that operates like an interest rate, but that is what funds staff to operate this program. We could take a 4% cut off of the grant to pay for our staff, but we charge the administrative fee on every single loan so that every single dollar we get from EPA can go to projects. One of the bigger things everyone wants to know is principal forgiveness. What do we qualify for? How do we get it? What are we eligible for? We are required to take into consideration income, unemployment, as well as change in population into a metric for eligibility for principal forgiveness. When Egypt passed, we also looked at some of the guidance out. We were encouraged to take another look. We had also moved from the 2015 to the 2020 census, which made some interesting adjustments on income for some of these communities. I'm still a little baffled on where some of these numbers come from, but they're there. So we added a couple more metrics. You can get points for consolidating or extending service to unserved areas or taking out failing systems to try to encourage communities to do that, as well as if the poverty rate in that community is greater than or equal to 20%, you can also get additional points to try to qualify for principal forgiveness. And if you can get up to 40 points, which is relatively easy to do, the community is eligible for up to the lesser 50% of the total eligible costs for $1.5 million principal forgiveness. And if you can get up to 70 points, you're eligible for up to 100% of the eligible costs or $2 million in principal forgiveness. Another avenue is principal forgiveness for green projects. So if a community, let's just say they don't qualify for any principal forgiveness, they've got very low rates, they've got a good economic outlook on their community. So the metric I just went over says you're not eligible for anything. But if they add energy efficiency upgrades to their system, water efficiency, traditional stormwater green infrastructure, start infiltrating stormwater, then they can get up to the lesser 50% of the total eligible green costs or $500,000 in principal forgiveness. We also have the environmentally innovative / decentralized category, in which a community can be eligible for up to 100% in principal forgiveness if we have that money available. These are getting very expensive. We co-fund pretty much everything here in West Virginia. But the communities we're looking at are very small, they're remote, they probably don't have a sewer system, they don't have anything at this point in time. So this is a way for us to try to kick off these communities to where we will actually fund the pre-bid costs. And our intended use plan, it goes into what they need to do to qualify for that funding. Jennifer mentioned our on-site system loan program. That program has been working very well. This is statewide. Our legislative rule does not recognize our ability to fund directly to homeowners. So this is a way we can get money out to homeowners without us having a direct pipeline to them. It's a pass-through account. So we have partnered with the West Virginia Housing Development Fund and SHED. And Jennifer, I noticed you mentioned that in the Ashland project. in which we funnel money to those organizations. They make loans to the homeowners. The loan terms are 2% interest, 10-year loan, the replacement, repair, and upgrade of on-site sewer systems. They can also take out a loan if they need to connect to a sewer system that is coming by their home. If they don't have the money to run the line from their home to the main line, they can get a low interest loan to do that as well. We have set aside $500,000 this past year to go toward these projects, and it has been a very good partnership, I think, for everybody. Our project priority list. I think a lot of people get stuck on this because we have a very lengthy project priority list. We have far more need than we even have money on our project priority list. That being said, people apply, they put their applications in everywhere. They want to be ready in case their project is ready to move. You have to be on our PPL in order to receive money during that fiscal year. So if you're not on our PPL and a project comes out of left field, we're not anticipating it, we would have to amend the PPL in order to give you a loan. But we're also first come, first served. So if you're saying, we've got 150 projects on our PPL and you are number 99, well, if 1 through 98 are still working through the planning, permitting, getting rights of way and easements, final title opinion, all of that, and they are not ready to proceed, well, then guess what? You're going to get funding. The irony is, except when Chesapeake Bay was really at its high point, we have never run out of funding. With the money constantly coming through repayments of principal and interest and annual cap grants and state match, we're constantly recycling this money. So we've never needed to turn anyone down, but we will only commit the funding once the project is actually ready to proceed. EPA is judging these programs based upon the pace and disbursement. So we have to get that money out the door. There are challenges to getting these projects for these small remote areas, completed. You got to pay debt service. If there's a loan component, they've got to be able to repay the loan. And even without the loan, just the ability for these customers to pay the necessary rate to operate and maintain this system is going to be a very real challenge because it's small numbers of customers. We worked with communities as small as 50 customers to 100 customers. It is not easy for this to work. We're constantly battling this challenge. And like I said, we co-fund with everybody because some of these communities, they could not afford a loan. They're going to need 100% grant or principal forgiveness. A good example of this, we're working with the town of Yeager. Yeager has got every funding source imaginable except for the Corps of Engineers. You've got SRF, Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council, Small Cities, ARC, USDA, AML pilot grant. You have everybody to put enough money together to fund one project that has to be all grant because to do otherwise, it would make it absolutely unaffordable. And as it is, even once that project is built, the combined water and sewer rate for the residents in Yeager, I think it's going to be about $100 a month combined. Topography in West Virginia, that's a challenge. Where are you going to site your wastewater treatment system? Where are we going to find enough flat space to do this? Discharge point is a real key. We look at everything. We look at subsurface, surface. What is the best option for that community? These are not one-size-fits-all projects. We don't lock ourselves into the type of technology. We'll go everything from a package plant to on-site to cluster. What works best for that community? What is the topography? Where's the floodplain? Can we do a subsurface? Will the area perk? If not, do we have a stream large enough to sustain a waste load allocation? What are the limits? You have to go into all of these projects with a very real open mind on how to serve them. Jennifer brought up the RMEs, need someone to operate and maintain it. Most of the time, we've got an established entity that can do this or utility. Others, there's a couple we're working with where we're creating one. We have to build new boxes on some of these projects to even make it through. And then even if you do have a responsible entity nearby that can do the project, they're already an existing utility, they're going to have competing priorities. Do they need to do upgrades on their existing system? Are there a CSO community, an SSO community? Do they have nutrient criteria? What is going on? They may not feel like they have the capacity or ability to even reach out and sewer someone in their area. You know, she talked about McDowell County a little bit ago, taking on Ashland. Well, Hopewood was the first sewer project McDowell County did. They had been focusing, their main priority was drinking water. They were trying their best to get safe drinking water to as many of their residents as possible. Wastewater was only going to come after that. So there are a lot of challenges to getting these small decentralized areas served. But that being said, we're getting them served. It takes a long time and it takes a village, but we're getting them served. A few of the more recent ones is Burgoo and Webster County PSD, community of Winona, New Haven PSD, and Fayette County. Our watershed assessment branch resampled Kenny Creek, and with that New Haven project, Kenny Creek's meeting fecal water quality standards, which is a very real success story. Colwood said that's McDowell County PSD's first sewer project. They're quite excited about it. They're moving on to other projects. Yeager got a request to send that one out for advertisement for construction. That project has been decades in the making. And we've got more in progress. It's constantly moving. Our on-site system loan program, we have funded up to 510 on-site septic systems statewide with the inception of that program. But there has to be support for these projects. Without support, they're not going to move. Even with an RMA, a utility, if a community is going to battle them on this project, they're just not going to do it. It's just not going to be worth the hassle. And to give an example, I mean, Burgoo took a long time. And it was, in this case, it was a utility that just the board members weren't interested. We went up there, took a look at this area, took a look at what was going on. They had a collection system with 3 distinct straight pipes, no treatment. Raw sewage 365 days a year. We went up and talked about principal forgiveness, what they can be eligible for, how to do it. And they did not take us up on this offer at all. Years later, constantly checking on that, see if anybody's interested in doing that. It was a needed project, desperately needed. And then finally, a now retired DEP employee came by. We got to talking about it. He asked if that money was still there. I'm like, yes, it is. So he's like, we've got a new board. I know some people on there. Let me talk to them. New board members got very excited when they realized this opportunity was available. And once they knew it, the project went, and it went quickly. That being said, community that will remain nameless to protect the guilty, they got project designed, going to be a subsurface package plant. You would only see a few inches at the top of this, above ground on this plant. You'd see the electrical controls. It was designed, it was ready to go, getting ready to get 100% principal forgiveness. This community to this day still does not have sewer service. One of the customers called me up about this project, would love to have had it because neighbors were pumping out their septics into the ditch lines. They got very nervous about it. There was a customer whose a portion of his property would have been condemned to site the plant. It was removed from everyone else, but he did not want this project. They were a little uncomfortable. We took them to another site. The exact same system is in play. They could see it, touch it, smell it. The consulting engineer was there. We were there. Environmental enforcement folks were there. We're discussing money. He said, hey, we're concerned. We have a lot of power outages. It's like, that's okay. We can fund a generator. That's not going to be a problem. This is a great project. The next mayoral election was based upon who was against paying a sewer bill. And the mayor that was against it was the one that won. So the money we would have given to that community went to fund Winona. So if you don't have the support, it doesn't matter how bad the conditions are, the project is just not going to make it. So how do these communities get started? I had the mayor of Auburn cold call me one day asking me how to get funding. So we're pretty accessible. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with regional planning and development councils. Our state is covered with them. Every county has one that, they cover multiple counties. So every county has one they can reach out to. They're very active in their communities. These people know how to apply for funding. They know how to get through the process. So that is really the first step. They can walk them through procuring an engineer, a project accountant. Lots of times they don't have to be, but more often than not, they're the project administrators for the communities. So they know how to reach out to us. They know how to guide their communities through the funding process. But the first step in West Virginia is we have an Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council. That is the clearinghouse for all state funding agencies. So a water or sewer project in West Virginia cannot access any state funding without this initial step. We sit on the council along with the Public Service Commission, Department of Health, Water Development Authority. You have appointed members, the Housing Development Fund, Economic Development, all state funding agencies are there. Our federal counterparts are also invited and they do participate as well. So when an application shows up at the council, everybody sees it. They usually do ask for certain types of funding that will be evaluated. What are the rates that they're proposing? The Public Service Commission does a really good cash flow analysis to see if the rates will sustain the project. We're looking at it for technical viability or the consolidation opportunities. Is this really a good fit? Is this duplicative of another system nearby? But once you get through that review, and everybody that is in this process, they know what's expected. You get a technical funding committee review of the application. Once it's deemed viable, we'll vote. It's 2 meetings a month. And in a funding recommendation, it's not a binding commitment of funds. It's a recommendation to pursue. So like I mentioned, all of the funding sources for the community of Yeager went through the process. They're recommended to pursue all of those. Then we work with that community. If you have an SRF funding recommendation, we hold their hands, walk them through the process. So that's initially how, that's the first step in getting these projects moving. I did add, because mentioned sharing these slides, and if my slide will change, and my computer is locked up. But I do have on the last slide resource links, one to our SRF page, the IJDC website, the Association of Regional Councils. Those are good first links to go to. On our SRF page, you're going to find our intended use plans. You will find access to SHED and West Virginia Housing Development Fund. We also have something that we did this past year, which was the need survey. So did a need survey for West Virginia. I will say stormwater needs were very tough to find documentation, so we're weak on that, but we were able to document point and non-point source SRF eligible needs to the tune of over $11 billion in West Virginia, just to give you an idea of the need that's out there. But you can also click on that on our webpage, go see what documentation we have, what communities, where it's at. It's an interesting tool that we're going to try to maintain until the next survey 4 years from now. So that is essentially what I've got to present. So if anybody has any questions, just let me know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathy, for all that information. We'll open up the floor now for any questions. And again, you can write it in the Q&A box, or you can let us know if you'd like to be taken off mute so you can ask your question out loud as well.
And sorry, my PowerPoint's locked up. If it's still showing, I'm trying to get out of here.
Well, I have a question. You really stressed the importance of getting on that project priority list, and it sounded like I'm trying to think from like the perspective of watershed associations, which it seems like is kind of being that community connector and helping to garner community support. And maybe the first step of getting on the project priority list is reaching out to the Regional Planning and Development Council to like get the conversation started. Is that correct?
I would think so. I mean, if there is a community out there that you think could benefit by having upgraded or a new sewer system and there's a lot of interest in it, yeah, bring it to the attention of the regional planning and development councils. That more than likely they're probably already aware of it. They're very much in contact with their mayors and county commissioners and others, but that would be a good starting point.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, any other questions? Oh, I saw something. All right. Samuel has a question here in the Q&A, and he's asking, are the clean water SRF funds available for GI stormwater projects like bioretention?
We can fund stormwater system projects. That is an eligible cost. So if any community has stormwater issues, we're getting ready to do some stormwater work for the city of Huntington, actually. The only problem is, you know, what rates are they going to have in place that are dedicated to repaying a loan? You're not going to find really much in the way of 100% grant funding for these, at least not through our program. You'd have to get multiple sources to do that.
Oh, I have another question. What are the most common other sources of funding that projects might bring to the table to supplement SRF funds?
Well, for stormwater, there's not a lot of other eligible sources. There's a couple out there. I'm trying to think of what another one would be, but the SRF, for the most part, for just the stormwater only project, stormwater system project, I'm not talking about, you know, doing stormwater infiltration, but that could be part of your project. We're the bulk of the funding. I think you could probably get 319 money to partner with us, other types of money like that. But for sewer projects, Infrastructure and Jobs Development Council, they have their own source of loan grants, small cities block grants, ARC grants, the Army Corps of Engineer grant funding, USDA has a loan grant program as well. So we partner with all of them. And we can also be used, our second round money, our repayment funding with the SRF can be used as the state match if it's necessary.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and share Kathy's last slide. Did that work?
It did.
And I do so mostly as an advertisement for going to check out the watershed resources page where this presentation will be available.
Great.
There's a lot of funding out there right now for infrastructure, both water and sewer. So if a community is interested, now is the time to strike. So
Awesome. Thank you for noting that. For sure. All right. Well, if we don't have any further questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar here. So firstly, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Jennifer, for presenting today and sharing all of your knowledge with us. And for all of the attendees as well, thank you for taking the time out of your Thursday afternoon to attend this last webinar. We do have a very short evaluation form that Martin is going to put in the chat. We're also going to email this out to folks with the recordings and with the presentations too. So it'd be helpful to know what you thought about this webinar series, whether you thought the topics were useful, which presentations you enjoyed, other topics you might want for future webinars, either on fecal coliform or other topics as well. So Martin just put that in the chat. And then we also encourage you, if you are not already signed up for the Watershed Network's newsletter called the Water Net, Martin will put the sign up link in the chat for that newsletter as well. It's a quarterly newsletter that includes resources and opportunities for watershed groups, as well as highlights successful watershed projects as well. And then if you have a specific training idea that you just want to send a quick email and maybe don't want to fill out an evaluation form, you can always email me. Martin will put my email in the chat, and we can try to do our best to get some training on that specific topic. So with that being said, thank you all so much for attending this webinar series, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.